Welcome to Planet Poetry. I'm Peter Kenny.
And I'm Robin Houghton. And in this episode, the last of Series 3, we're going to be talking to Richard Skinner and his two most recent poetry collections, taking us from an iconic 7th century poet, Caedmon, to the possibly equally iconic, not sure, David Bowie.
And we'll have a squint back at some of the interviews that buttered our parsnips this season while sitting in Robin's potting shed. Unlikely, but a fact.
Before all that excitement, let's hear Peter's interview with Richard Skinner.
Richard Skinner's poetry first appeared in the Faber anthology, First Pressings, in 1998, and since then he has been widely published in print and online. He has published 4 books of poetry with Smokestack, and his most recent collections are Dream into Play from Poetry Salzburg 2022, Cut Up from Vanguard Editions 2023, and White Noise Machine from Salt, also 2023. His fiction includes The Red Dancer, a Faber and Faber reissue in 2017, 2 novellas, The Mirror and The Velvet Gentleman, published in 1 volume by Faber and Faber in 2014. Richard is also director of the fiction programme at Faber Academy, where he teaches a variety of fiction and life writing courses. And his non-fiction includes Writing a Novel, Bring Your Ideas to Life the Faber Academy Way, perhaps unsurprisingly published by Faber. He has also started Vanguard Editions, a not-for-profit press, and edits the annual poetry magazine 14. So, Richard Skinner, welcome to Planet Poetry.
Great to be here, Peter. Thank you very much for the invitation.
All that introduction, gosh, that sounds a lot. Do you have any time to do stuff that's not to do with literature? Or are you always on the clock, as it were, taking notes?
Well, when I'm not writing or publishing, I'm out walking. And my other big thing is long-distance walking.
Ah, yeah.
And I do a lot of those. But no, I'm pretty obsessive, I think. I work pretty hard.
In fact, I think I've seen some of the poems that you glean while you're on your walk.
Yeah, I walked the Pennine Way last year for charity, and I wrote 4 or 5 poems, in my head as I was walking. I think there's something very closely connected between writing and walking.
Yeah. Today we're going to focus on 2 of your works, Dream into Play and White Noise Machine, which, as we record, has just been released into the wild. So if we start with Dream into Play, the first thing that struck me sort of generally was there's such a wealth of cultural references that, everything from the I Ching to Roland Barthes, you've got references to the deer hunter and, peppered with kind of submerged song lyrics. What I really liked about the way you do this is that you still manage to wear your learning lightly. The book opens with a poem that's actually rather emotional. So could we just dive in?
Yeah, sure. So this is called The Green Capitals. Low pressure blasts down from Cape Wrath and hits you full in the face, clearing the lines, the stale air, from the catacombs of your heart. And you recall that last time your mother stopped you dead in your tracks with her truth, which reminds you in turn how her cells swarmed to fix the tear in your broken heart. Even in an anechoic chamber, the heart insists on its tick and pulse, its molecules, and the blood's virus carrying the line through you, like her words, echoing in the room that everyone carries inside them.
The final image is of the heart as a room that everyone carries inside them. And this is a very emotional poem, but it's still quite controlled, that the room is still a sealed chamber through which you're admitting things or not admitting them.
Yeah, difficult to get to.
Yeah. So, in terms of how you employ emotion in how you write, is it your catalyst or is it something you manage and accommodate through the act of writing itself?
Yeah, good question. So this poem is about my mum, who passed away in 2019. And when she was ill, she spent about 4 weeks in hospital before she died. And she was in Haywards Heath, which is in Sussex, and I was in London. So it's about a 50-minute train journey. So I spent as much time as I could. But I found myself waiting in corridors and wards a lot. And for the first time in my life, really, I found myself writing in response to what was going on. And actually, 4 little poems came up out of that month, which I published in the previous pamphlet of mine called Invisible Sun. It's called Corridors and Wards. And it was the first time, really, in my life where I had used writing as a way of coming to terms with a loved one passing or grief. But I'd never done that before. I wasn't expecting to be writing these things when I was there, and I did. But in answer to your question, I don't go into a poem with an emotion in mind, no.
Yeah.
I'm very much of the belief that you have to just sort of remain open, keep the channels clear, let whatever's inside you come out, rather than trying to put something in to a poem. I think, things have got to come out of the poem, and you've just got to arrange yourself to allow that to happen. Yeah, I think writing a poem is a kind of way of controlling how you're feeling, but not in a bad way. It's a way of organizing how you feel, making it clearer to yourself that this is how you feel about someone.
It's only kind of some time afterwards that I was thinking, oh yeah, that's also about art as well, because the way you approach it is so fresh. Anechoic chamber. I had to look that up.
Yeah, I mean, I would love to go into an anechoic chamber. I know someone who has, a good friend of mine has, and she says it's absolutely terrifying.
Yeah.
Because it's so quiet. It's absolute silence. But of course, even in deep space or an anechoic chamber, you can always hear 2 things, which is your heart beating and the sound of the blood pumping through your veins. So there's no such thing as total silence, but those are the only things you can hear.
Yeah.
And the ears and our minds are just not used to having so much absolute silence. But I wanted in the poem, the catacombs, the chamber and the room. I wanted that idea of sort of the undergroundness of it, and the sort of...
The buriedness.
The buriedness of it, yeah.
Can I ask you to read Ars Poetica?
In Dream into Play, there are 2 poems that are translations of poems by Andrea Ghibellini. And he's a poet whose work I came across in a Faber anthology of Italian poetry, which I was reading during the lockdown. And loved his work so much. And I managed to track him down. During the first lockdown, we corresponded and we agreed that we would do a little translation project. I sent him some of my books and he sent me some of his, and we chose 2 each to translate. So these 2 poems, In the Garden and Ars Poetica, are the 2 poems of Andrea's. This is Ars Poetica. In this garden of minds, I don't want to say anything anymore. It's an ink drawing on which tonight I just don't want to add names to things and forever say goodbye. It is not easy, and it can be done, but in my poetry, I don't want any theology. The temptation to insert a house, a tree, and a wind, albeit lightly, on the edge of the current and a canoe of used sheets and untrue grasses, yellow, violent, like the sunflowers you were always looking for.
That is a very beautiful poem. I can see why you'd want to engage with that.
What I love about his work, which I think probably is the same with mine, is the sense of not closing everything down, leaving things pretty open for interpretation. And his work is wonderful. I thoroughly recommend listeners go away and discover him.
I was dipping into writing a novel, Bring Your Ideas to Life the Faber Academy way. And there's this quote very early on that says, "Stories are not written from the head or the heart. They are written from the stomach. This is one of the strongest beliefs I have about writing." Now, I was going to ask you whether that statement holds good for poetry. And if you have your own poetics, and do you have your own rules and do you break them? I know that's sort of a bundle of questions.
I don't really have poetics, I don't think. But I do sometimes follow rules. So I love form. During the pandemic, another thing I did was that I read a lot of the Oulipo guys. So Oulipo is a movement of French literature in the 50s and 60s.
Oh, yes, yeah.
And it's people like Georges Perec and Italo Calvino was involved. And basically they brought mathematical rules into literature. If you wanted to write a poem according to such and such constraints, and you had to follow those constraints. So it's a bit like a sonnet has to have 14 lines, but these guys were hardcore. Georges Perec wrote a whole novel without using the letter E, for instance.
Yeah.
And he called it Avoid. Which is the great English translation. I've done a lot of playful, formal poetry in the last few years. And so that's been my sort of poetics, if you like, for the last little while. But that's just one aspect. You know, I'm still interested in sonnets and lyrics and lyrical poetry, as well as playful, you know, funny poetry.
Yeah.
But I never really know what's going to happen when I feel that thing that you feel when a poem is on its way.
There's all kinds of different pathways I could have taken through your writing. You're going off in so many different directions, but somehow it manages to seem coherent. I think that links them all together is the very variety, in a way.
For me, you know, music and film, as well as other poets, of course, they're so deeply embedded in me. I've been deeply moved by so many movies in my life that they've become part of me.
Yeah.
Part of how I think and how I relate to the world. And, you know, if I'm in Vienna, I might think of The Third Man straight away, you know, and that'll be part of my experience of Vienna or Paris, which I was in last week. And I love Paris, you know, but it just makes me think of all the movies that are set in Paris.
Yeah.
For me, cultural reference and culture is just incredibly important and has shaped who I am. And so therefore it comes out in my writing.
Let's move on to two poems after Virtue. The first of the two is Cadman.
Yeah, so Cadman, as you know, was a monk. One of the long-distance walks I did a couple of years ago was St Hilda's Way up in Yorkshire, which is a 5-day walk through the North York Moors and basically linking up places and churches that were linked to St Hilda. Mm-hmm. And so on that walk, I learned a lot about St Hilda and also about Cadman. Apparently, all of the brothers in Whitby Abbey, where Cadman was working as a layman, he looked after the animals. St Hilda and all of the monks were having an evening of mead and song. And Cadman, who was not religious, wasn't educated, became very inspired. And the next morning, he had a dream, and this poem came to him in a dream. And the next day, he sang it to St Hilda. And apparently it was so beautiful that she immediately made him a monk.
Wow, yeah.
He actually lived the rest of his life as a devout monk and is often considered to be the first sort of bard. His hymn is really the first piece of English poetry, way before Chaucer, you know.
Isn't he the first English poet that we know the name of?
There were probably lots of other poets before him, but because he was with St Hilda, his name was noted down in a book somewhere, you know, and that's why we have it. Yeah, so this is Cadman's hymn. Walking is nothing but a controlled way of falling, pushing forward into still unsecured galleries. And when you enter the dreamlight chamber, making sure to clamp, not twist, the handles. Notice the ammonites frozen in the wall, the seabirds dropping and dipping their wings as you fall to your knees at the foot of the statue. You are dazzled by the blue star in her belly, the cup of jewels in the hinge of her hands. Her blood-red eyes are a sharpening stone, as your knees of glass start to score the flags. You realize there is still a passageway forward, and this alabaster frieze of grief shows you grief is nothing but a release of love.
It shows you grief is nothing but a release of love. It's that thing of something quite plainly said is a gut punch. This is a kind of mystical vision in a way. And there are moments, quite a few of them in your poetry, that suggest an opening into something bigger. Is this, sleight of hand of language, or do you have an idea about what we're opening into?
I'm not a religious person, but I'm very, very absorbed by belief system. I guess I would like to say I'm spiritual, but without being religious.
Yeah.
Transcendence is a word that I strive for in some poems, this being one, definitely. For example, one thing I love is that the movies of a French filmmaker called Robert Bresson, who made these incredibly spiritual movies in the 50s and 60s and 70s. And his movies always end with his main character moving from one spiritual plane up to another higher one. And it happens very quickly, and it's always the close of the film. Endings in poems to do with transcendence are really important because I want to use them as a kind of a lift-off, like a platform for the reader to be projected into a thought, or their own thought or their own experience. So it's a moment of transformation. And I think I do that a lot, or I try to at least, in a lot of my poetry. I think poems are terribly spiritual things.
I agree.
They're like prayers for our modern society. So few of us are actually particularly religious. So I think poetry has sort of filled that gap for a lot of people, including myself.
Well, I'd like to move now to White Noise Machine. There are poems in here that are clearly not afraid to be enigmatic, and we do enter quite mysterious worlds. In one of the early poems in the collection, you talk about a cherry tree that explodes into white noise every spring. But I want to ask you to read Del Titnu.
Del Titnu. Morning comes, augmented in fog, a mute radiance. Building fronts stand estranged, all edges and corners. People clutching their cases rally at bus stops, muster at airports. All that motion confluenced to a warehouse, immunity between walls. The tides slacken, the seasons backpedal, winter to autumn, gold to green. Life's white machine distilled to a wishbone. Then evening falls, clouds of pewter, ash bloom, carbon.
I'd be hard-pressed to tell you what's going on there, but it's just so enigmatic. They're sort of quite doomy at the end. There's this ash cloud, morning comes augmented in fog, so you know everything's obfuscated. But you're kind of challenging us to make sense of it in a way. And of course, I googled Del Titnu. It was only after doing so that I found a result that told me it was untitled backwards, and I thought, duh.
But for me, what I love about that word is it sort of sounds vaguely like, a former Soviet bloc country or something. It is linked to a piece of music. The track is called Del Titnu, and it's by a group called Tortoise. And Tortoise are a sort of an American rock jazz group, and that's where I got the title from. And I didn't know it was untitled spelled backwards, and for many years. I think it's up to the reader to decide what the poem is about. But all I will say is, for me, it is about sort of mass migration. It's about some kind of catastrophe, some kind of cataclysmic event.
Yes.
And I don't really want ever to get overtly political, but that poem is kind of the nearest I come to being political.
Yeah. People clutching their cases, rally at bus stops, muster at airports, all that motion confluence through a warehouse. Yeah, there is that all in there.
It was a very difficult poem to write this. It took a long time. I'm not very good at working on poems, sort of over a long period of time. I find that if I have to work very long on a poem, it usually means it's not working. But this one was one that I just couldn't leave alone.
Now let's go into a slightly noirish world. Can I ask you to read Madame de Shanghai?
This is Madame de Shanghai for Luc Ferrari. In Le Quartier Asiatique, Li Ping enters a video store and, in Mandarin, asks for Madame de Shanghai. The woman behind the counter laughs and points her to the shopping mall on Avenue d'Ivry. On her way to the mall, she thinks to herself, "My eyes. What is happening with my eyes? Escaped. The corners of my mouth are blushing. My body, no feelings. My body becomes pale." The mall is bustling, voices raised. She hears flutes playing, 3 of them. She bumps into an old boyfriend. They laugh. She hears Tingsha chimes being struck. She finds the watermelon seller. On his stall are slices, cerise smiles with green gums. He says the rumour is that there was a sighting of Madame 2 days ago. He tells her to visit the seamstress. She knows where everybody is. She follows his lead. Flutes again. Where is that sound coming from? Doorways are so dark she can't see inside them. The alleyways get more narrow. Finally, Li Ping finds the place. Fabrics hanging everywhere, crazy designs like theatre backdrops. She has to cajole the old woman, who has eyes like slits. Eventually, the old woman laughs at a question. J'ai oublié, she says. She hears gunshots, 2. She rises from the chair and leaves the shop. Outside, she sees the last of the witnesses flee round a corner. She is alone in the mall, which has now become a hall of mirrors. There is a woman lying on the ground. She is wearing a white dress, like Marilyn Monroe's. Is it Marilyn Monroe? Who am I? Me. It's me. Li Ping leans over the woman, who is lying so still that she's not sure she's real, and sees the hole in the woman's forehead, the mark of Cain. Li Ping looks closely at the lady's face, almost nose to nose. She has coins on her eyes, which part like curtains. In the sockets, she sees a paperless heaven, vapor trails where her sightlines should be, and a mustering of marabou storks, high up, in full flight, carrying away all her nightmares.
There's such a kind of dreamlike quality about this. It's reminding me a bit of David Lynch. Things suddenly escalate into being odder and odder from quite sort of mundane beginnings. There is a kind of strong narrative thread in this, and I want to ask you about how you see the relationship between writing prose and writing poetry.
As a novelist, I'm obviously very interested in telling stories. This is my phantasmagorical Wild Goose Chase poem, but it's definitely a story. I've done a lot of these poems over all of the books I've put out. I've written one from point of view of Greek myths that I'm interested in, so Orpheus, Ariadne, and in Dream Interplay there's one on Atropos. They are longish poems, and I sort of think of them as single-voiced sort of meditations, mythological characters thinking back over their lives and reflecting. This particular poem is quite closely based on a piece of music by Luc Ferrari called Madame de Shanghai. And it's about 15 minutes long. And Luc Ferrari was famous because he used tape recording machines a lot. He did a lot of field recordings. And actually, he made this piece, which is got flutes in it. But it is about this Chinese woman who is wandering around the Asian district of Paris, trying to locate a VHS copy, The Lady from Shanghai, the movie by Orson Welles. Yeah. And it's never explained why. But in the piece of music, towards the end, she sort of falls into the movie and she gets caught up in the Hall of Mirrors shootout at the end. So I just wanted to write a kind of poem version of that with a slightly different ending. You're right about Lynch. I love Lynch's movies. I guess Lynch's movies don't operate via normal logic, and that's what I like about them. Yeah. This poem doesn't operate via normal logic either.
So, White Noise Machine, when I heard that title for the first time, I thought it sounds like the title of a David Bowie album, one that he never made but probably would have got round to. So I was delighted to find in it your poem Song, Follow Heroes, Follow Me. Could you say a bit about the kind of strange mixology you've got going on here?
Again, with the Oulipo guys that I was talking about earlier on, one of the things that... Well, they didn't invent it. So cut-ups go way back to the Dadaists were the first people to use cut-ups. But the Oulipo guys and Burroughs, William Burroughs, started to use them a lot in the 50s and 60s. And David Bowie learnt how to use the technique from William Burroughs, actually. And he used it particularly for his early songs. The most famous example is Jean Genie. Is just a complete cut-up from, nonsense text taken from newspapers. So I did a poem in Dream Into Play that is a cut-up of the song Once in a Lifetime by Talking Heads. And I just played and played and played over the last few years with cut-ups. And there are 4, I call them songs in White Noise Machine, and they come every quarter. So they're like the cornerstones, really, of the whole collection. They hold everything else up. They're quite long. And what I wanted to do there was I thought, rather than cut up one song, I started to think about, what about 2 songs together, pop songs that were quite spiritual. So, for instance, I love the song Hounds of Love by Kate Bush. And I also love Salisbury Hill by Peter Gabriel. And I thought songs are quite similar in a way. They're about people who know that they have to make a change in their lives, either by admitting love, so in the song The Hounds of Love, the hounds represent her fear of accepting love. And in Salisbury Hill, it's the eagle, who visits the main character to say, you've got to make a change in your life. You've got to cut the connection and walk out of the machinery. I got very excited by this. Follow Heroes, Follow Me. And it's based on Follow You, Follow Me by Genesis and Heroes, obviously, by David Bowie. And when I thought about those 2 songs, not the most obvious songs to go together, but they actually are very similar in content. They're about someone speaking to another person, imploring them to try and stay together, but acknowledging that might be difficult. Both songs are pleas for union, but with an acceptance that things might not go completely smoothly. So with each of these 4 songs, they're organized in a very similar way. I printed out the lyrics, cut them up, literally put them on the floor, and then I sort of passed my eyes over all of the lyrics, looking for couplets. And it's a bit like dowsing, there's meaning there somewhere. You have to find it. And it's really exciting when you do find it. There's something amazing. I can't emphasize enough. Something absolutely amazing about cut-ups. They are alchemic and magical and extremely powerful. And then these couplets, I put them into a very highly repetitive orders. The idea is that the repetitions are supposed to be like incantations. They're supposed to be salves for the soul, have a balming effect, to soothe you. So I'll read song Follow Heroes, Follow Me. I will stay with you. Will you stay with me? Though nothing will keep us together. Oh, I see so very clearly now. We could steal time just for one day. All my fears are drifting by me so slowly now, and the shame was on the other side. The night is long, but you are here, standing by the wall. All the days and nights that we know will be, yes, we're lovers, and that is that. Every day is such a perfect day to spend. Just one single tear in each passing year. And you can be mean. We can be heroes forever and ever. Maybe we're lying, then you better not stay. I will stay with you. Will you stay with me? Though nothing will keep us together. In your arms, I will be king. And you will be queen, right here by my side, if ever I needed you. Oh, we can beat them, forever and ever, fading away. I will stay with you. Will you stay with me? Though nothing will keep us together. And you can be mean. We can be heroes forever and ever. All my fears are drifting by me so slowly now, and the shame was on the other side. Maybe we're lying, then you'd better not stay. Oh, I see so very clearly now. We could steal time just for one day. I will stay with you. Will you stay with me? Though nothing will keep us together. In your arms, I will be king, The night is long, but you are here, standing by the wall, and you will be queen, right here by my side if ever I needed you. Every day is such a perfect day to spend, just one single tear in each passing year. All the days and nights that we know will be, yes, we're lovers, and that is that. Oh, we can beat them forever and ever, fading away.
It comes across as, I think you're alluding to this, almost like a prayer-like incantation. And what's interesting is that the words are familiar, but, it's definitely become something different.
For me, that's the magic, is that you're taking these two things. The other thing to say about cut-ups is that you're dealing with other people's material, right? Yeah. So your own kind of intention and your own expression is done away with. And your ego, is done away with. You're dealing with somebody else's work. So that gives me, anyway, a freedom. But then if you can cut them together really well, then this third thing that you've created is its own thing. And it has its own identity and its own voice. It's not exactly like the other two, but it's the child of the other two. Yeah.
You're co-parenting it with two other writers in a way.
You never know what you're going to come up with, so it's constantly surprising. I could talk about cut-ups all day. William Burroughs said, when you cut into the present, the future leaks out.
It's just yet another example of the kind of richness of form. I'm going to ask you to read a final poem, which is Curtal Sonnet.
Of course. So this is Curtal Sonnet. Marriage is like a bridge, a bearer of two weights, a structure that would fold if one half went missing. Or like a vaulted roof whose arched ribs meet midway, whose way in a golden gate, a swing, then kissing. The capstone is the header, the main engager, without which there is no apex, no apogee. Then there is the lintel for the worn-out lover, a ledge that acts as a prop, a brace, a mainstay. The close is the coping, lain as a top cover. But all this starts blankly, the heart still to be hewn, the block of unworked stone.
Quite a sort of unsentimental love poem in a way, about the structure of marriage and, how it'd be impossible if one half went missing and so on, and the sense of it having to be worked at and built. And the fact it's a curtal sonnet that is only 10.5 lines long, it gives you, perversely enough, Gerard Manley Hopkins, wasn't it?
That's right, yes. Yeah. Apparently he went into great mathematical detail about why this was the perfect form for a sonnet, and he called it a curtal sonnet. I love them, I really do.
Well, it gives you the idea that there's kind of more to come as well, which in a marriage is a good thing in a way, isn't it?
I had a lot of fun looking up all of the different masonry terms, and architectural terms for bridges and ledges and houses, and and try and use all of those as metaphors. It's a cover, or it could be a support from below, or a cover from above, It can be a place of rest or a place of work, and so on and so on. This poem is my attempt at being Keats or Hopkins. It's metered quite carefully, and there's 4 beats per line, and it's supposed to sound a bit like music. I wanted to get something quite old-fashioned and classical in it.
Yeah, it's solid. I suppose this leads quite nicely onto the fact that right now you're sifting through submissions for your magazine 14, which is all about sonnets too. Are there any curtal sonnets? Would that be cheating?
Yes, that's a good question. I do get a lot of poems that aren't 14 lines long, would you believe? People just haven't read the submission guidelines well enough, And
clues in the name, really, isn't it?
I know. I guess technically it has to be 14 lines long. Yeah, submissions came in, nearly 600 submissions this year, which is just phenomenal.
Wow, yeah.
And a lot more than last year. So it's been going 4 years now. So I think gradually people have learnt about it and heard about it more and more as we go. So I'm hoping that this level of number of submissions will carry on, because obviously it means that the quality can remain very high in the magazine. It does, on the other hand, mean, unfortunately, that there's an awful lot of very fine poems that I won't be able to include, and being on the receiving end of, rejections all the time. I know how that feels. But it's getting a lot of love and support in the poetry world. People seem to like its design.
It is. It's a beautiful thing. Yeah.
Just about pays its way, just about. But, I don't make any money off it, but I'm not losing too much, so it's okay.
Good. And after that, what's your next big writing project?
Well, I've had 3 books out in the last year, and I'm a bit, my cupboard is a bit bare now, I have to say. I'm resting, I would say.
Good.
Because I'm quite interested in fractal poetry.
Right.
A new thing for me. I didn't really know much about fractal poetry. There's a wonderful book by a woman called Marianne Christie, exploring mathematical forms in poetry. And she writes a little bit about fractal poetry in that. And so that's where I found out about it. So I'm sort of just reading and thinking about that, seeing if I could do anything with
in
that.
In a nutshell, what's a fractal poem?
I knew you were going to ask me that. I don't think there's any one-line way of defining it, but basically it's free-form poetry, but that has clusters within it, and it might sort of be quite tightly turned in on itself, like a fractal would be. But there's no rhyme scheme or line length or anything like that. It's just more of a free form, but that has sort of repetitions within it and word clusters within it, I think.
Okay. Well, your public waits agog for your fractal poems. Richard Skinner, thank you so much for coming on to Planet Poetry. It's been a great pleasure to talk to you.
It's been wonderful. Thank you so much, Peter.
That was a terrific interview. It was so interesting what Richard had to say about so many things. He's got a real kind of hive mind, wide, broad range of reference and interest, hasn't he? I don't think any previous guest has mentioned Oulipo poetry before, have they? I haven't heard the term since I did my York MA or half an MA.
He really sort of lives and breathes culture, doesn't he? I mean, a lot of what he does is in response to, pieces of music or bits of film.
I loved the Cadman's hymn, when he talked about walking the St. Hilda's Way. Alabaster frieze of grief shows you grief is nothing but a release of love.
He's quite intellectual about the way he writes and the way he talks about it. But actually, something like this Cadman's hymn is a really emotional piece of work. He's got a sort of lightness of touch about everything he does, which I really respond to. Even when you're being plunged into the dubious district of Quartier Asiatique.
Madame de Shanghai, yeah. Wasn't that interesting? And listening to him read it, I was being drawn along in the story. And yet when I saw it on the page, it's quite long, isn't it? It's funny because it's a sort of poem that if I saw it in a book, I'd probably skip past it or think, I'll go back to that later. It was a bit long. Yeah. But what a mistake that would have been, because I really enjoyed that. And then you said it reminded you of a David Lynch movie, which I thought was quite good, actually.
And he's quite happy to leave things unresolved. And that gives him a real mystery about, some of his poems, that you're left, with lots of questions and things half unsaid. I find that really satisfying as a reader. I love things that leave you with kind of puzzlement and a bit of enigma.
There was something about that Madame de Shanghai as well that I was thinking of. Do you know that book by D.M. Thomas, The White Hotel?
I never read that, yeah.
It's really creepy. It's got a pretty gruesome end to it. But that is, as you were saying, you think you're watching something ordinary scene, but it takes some very dream-like turns.
Yeah. Richard, with his, being immersed in film as he is able to pull those tricks off in an elegant way.
I was interested when he talked about enjoying constraints, the Oulipo thing, or even sonnets. And that's something that's come up before, hasn't it? I wonder if it was Robert Hamburger.
Yeah. He would sort of say that, in effect, I'm paraphrasing, the form was wiser than the poet in a way. That when he's writing a sonnet, there's something about the sonnet that almost helps the poet get to what they actually mean.
Yeah, yeah.
I like that Kirtle sonnet that he wrote us about marriage is like a bridge, a bearer of two weights.
Oh, yes. and only 10.5 lines long. I mean, it's all completely new to me. In fact, as I was listening, I was making notes and I wrote down kirtle as Kirtle. That's because I've been immersed in medieval dress, I think. So I realised it wasn't that word at all. I was thinking, oh, what's this about? A dress or something? And I have to say, what he said about these cut-ups, I haven't really...
He was so enthused by those.
He was. And again, I hadn't sort of heard that phrase. Well, what do I know? But when he explained what it was, I sort of thought, oh, yeah, it's almost a version of found poetry, I suppose, in a way. But I was intrigued by the poem that he read because there were so many recognisable lines that... Yeah, because I've got a friend who works at PPL, PRS, you know, the people that make sure that we all have to pay if we use anyone's work. And she said to me that when it comes to pop songs or that, titles are not copyright. Yeah. So you could use a title of a song in your work without having to pay any fee or give any credit, as it were. But if you use a line from a song, that is copyright. That is potentially something that you would have to pay for permission to do. I love the idea of using lines from songs in poems, but I always sort of rein it in and think, oh no, I better not use that line because people know where it's from. Yeah. And I might get in trouble, but maybe I've just been a bit too cautious. Maybe that's rubbish, but I was listening to this poem and it was great. But of course, there's so many of those lines are completely iconic, aren't they? Yeah. Even if he hadn't explained which songs they were from. So I was very intrigued by that.
Yeah, I hope we haven't just dropped him, that the law are going to get hold of him.
I doubt it very, very much. I doubt it. I'm sure Richard
the poetry police will burst through Richard's door. Yeah.
Well, this is it, isn't it? The poetry police. I mean, like, oh my goodness, there's a poem with a line from a David Bowie song, you know, Nina, Nina. It's like, in what universe is that going to happen, frankly? Because of all the millions it's making from this poem, of course. That's the problem.
I found myself, after our interview, going off and reading Gerard Manley Hopkins' sonnets and, you know, thinking about Bowie. Back when he was making those albums, I used to read the music press like a little spotty geek that I was.
Yeah,
and, you know, I heard about all this cut-up stuff that Bowie was doing, but I kind of forgot about it. But, you know, that sort of alchemy of blending two songs together and, you know, finding little bits that match up. I dipped into his book about how to write a novel as well.
Oh, did you?
It's very practical and stimulating. It's one of those books I'd recommend to somebody who was thinking about it. And of course, it's the Faber Academy way, so you know, what could be better than that?
Well, I don't know. The Picador way, the Penguin way. A few other things that really kind of pinged. He talked about the endings of poems. I think it was that Cadman poem again. He talked about how he felt that the endings of poems were a place for the reader to be projected into something transcendent, shot off into the stars or something of their mind, of their thinking. And I really related to that. I thought as an excellent way of thinking about when you get to the end of a poem, rather than here's the end of the poem. It's more like over to you. I mean, yeah, of course, the end of a poem is kind of a handoff to the reader, but I liked that. And the other thing that he said was about he's not very good at working on poems for a long time. I thought that was quite interesting. I don't know about you. I may not work on a poem for a long time in a single session, but I do tend to put them away and come back to them.
Yeah, I do.
Many times over the months or years, usually. But maybe I am flogging a dead horse. Maybe if it's taking that long to get right, there's, you know, you're not going to be able to fix it. So that's another way of looking at it, I suppose. I
think I am a bit of a horse flogger sometimes. Or, you know, a quite promising, healthy young colt gets flogged so much that it's kind of just, that's the end of it. There is a point where you just must step away and abandon it.
Yeah.
And see if it stands on its own 4 feet to stretch the metaphor beyond endurance.
My final comment is, isn't it funny that he gets submissions to 14 magazine that actually aren't 14 lines long?
Yeah. You can imagine how exasperating that is.
He sounded very forbearing. They don't all read the submissions information, but I mean, yeah, that's pretty basic, isn't it?
Yeah.
But hey.
Bless him. God bless all editors for forbearance.
Yeah. I like this one. Do you like this one? Well, here we are. Where are we?
We appear to be in a potting shed.
We're in the potting shed.
Of course.
I'll turn the music off for now, I think. If I can. This is my potting shed.
It's tremendously elegant. It's very artistic. And they're growing things. There's a pot of basil.
Yeah.
That's all very Keats of you. And a wall that you've covered in people's poems.
Yeah, I just went crazy and tore pages out of various magazines and pasted them on the wall. I thought it won't last 5 minutes.
Yeah.
But actually it's lasted, 3 or 4 years already. Doesn't look too bad, does it?
Yeah, some good names.
It's nice if I'm in here just doing a bit of potting and I can read a poem or two and feel inspired.
So we're looking out of an open door at your garden. There's a black cat, your black cat.
That's Bobby, yes, Bobby. So this is our kind of annual away day, isn't it?
Yeah.
Where we go somewhere different.
To a potting shed.
in a charabang.
We were traumatised last time by going to a place where we were beset by flying ants, weren't we?
We were, that's
Nothing
right.
can hurt us here.
To review another year of Planet Poetry.
Amazing people that we've spoken to this year.
Including Greta Stoddart, Kate Wakeling and Rachel Piercy, Matthew Stewart, Mark Fiddes, Shane McRae. Shane McRae, yeah.
Peter Reynard.
Peter Reynard.
Robert Hamburger.
Oh, yes, Robert Hamburger.
Mimi Calvati.
Mimi, that's
Sarah
right.
Barnsley.
Sarah Barnsley. The list goes on and on.
All great poets.
Liz Berry.
Oh, she was good.
She was lovely, wasn't she? We opened with Kim Moore, who then went on to win the Forward Prize. Fantastic. And in fact, Greta Stoddart, who we interviewed just recently, went on to win a Chumley Award.
Yeah, just announced.
Yeah.
Well done to her.
We pick all the stars, don't we?
Yeah.
Are there any that stood out for you, Peter?
Well, each of them, I think it's apples and oranges, isn't it? You know, each of them was fantastic in a different way.
Absolutely, yeah.
I've been thinking lately about, the reasons why people write, and having, we've spoken to Richard Skinner just as our last guest of the season.
Yeah, yeah.
And he's such a sort of craftsman and inspired by form.
Sometimes people are inspired to write from something that's happened to them or something that comes from internally.
Yeah, by events that happen to them that suddenly leave them trying to express themselves. I mean, I love talking to Mimi Calvati. I didn't know the story about her, being sent away to a foreign land, to a boarding school on her own at the age of 6.
Yeah.
And losing all her language she was talking about her book Afterwardness. Much of that was informed by this kind of the visual memories and kind of patterns of a remembered childhood for which, the language was lost.
Yeah.
I thought it was an amazing book and I was very moved by it.
Let's remind ourselves of the interview with Mimi.
Was an attempt to explore and to speak for myself and to say what it actually was like for me, as opposed to, I think throughout all my life, I've slightly struggled with what people have assumed it was like, or, made parallels between, this experience is like that experience. For example, lots of children have been sent to boarding school, obviously, and there's lots of things we would all have in common in our experiences. But very few of them were sent to boarding school, say, without any language, which was very important to me. I didn't have a word of English.
Oh, gosh,
and of
really?
course, nobody in school in Shanklin spoke Farsi. And also in the holidays, I never went home. So I very quickly forgot not only my first language, Farsi, but my family, my country, everything.
So hearing Mimi talk about losing her language and having to learn a new one made me think about what Kim Moore had to say when she spoke to us about her collection, All the Men I Never Married. And I was interested in the fact that several of the poems explore these microaggressions, don't they? These incidents of casual sexism, and she writes about them in different ways. Quite often a poem will end in a kind of a silence, or a kind of a ... or like something that's not said.
Yeah.
And we talked a bit about that, the idea of when silence is a passive thing and when it's actually, when she uses silence.
When she chooses to use
when
silence.
When she chooses to. Anyway, let's hear how Kim described it.
A lot of the poems, I ended up coming back to silence and feeling, kind of going through these different emotions about silence, like feeling angry with myself for my own kind of what I was terming as complicity. I read something in Sarah Ahmed and just thinking about coping mechanisms with sexism and trying to reframe silence as, yes, it can be passivity, but it can also be resistance. It can be a kind of radical form of resistance, just not saying anything, or trying to think of silence as a tool that I use consciously, whereas before I would be using it unconsciously and then feeling cross about myself afterwards.
Yeah.
So I don't go around through my life now arguing with everyone that annoys me in a sexist, that's being sexist and, giving them what for. Sometimes I choose to just bite my tongue.
Yeah.
But the fact that I'm choosing now, and it's not, that is through writing these poems. They've changed, they've changed me and changed the way that I can deal with this stuff.
So when is a car journey not really a car journey? I think it's when you're in the company of Claire Best. Because
a slick segue.
Because I felt absolutely inspired by her memoir and her poetry. And there's at least 2 poems where she has the idea of being driven, of driving. One being driven by her son, which exercises all her anxieties and makes her really want to just grip onto things. And the other, which was about following red tail lights in fog and just having to trust. So
yeah, she had some interesting things to say, didn't she, about how she had to learn to trust in a way.
Yeah, she comes from a sort of context of having her trust betrayed, and what's beautiful about her poetry is that she often enacts the difficulty of having to trust, but does trust, and that's quite a moment of growth as a human as well.
Let's hear a snippet of your interview with Claire.
Does trust play a big part in your writing, or am I completely imagining it?
I think it's enormous. I think it runs through me as a person, that theme, and my writing for sure. And its ugly sidekick, betrayal, of course.
Yeah.
It's a very challenging one for me to think about because I didn't learn about trust in the right ways as a child. In fact, it took me a long time to understand what trust is. And I think it's about reciprocal truth, something about there being 2 things or 2 people and the truth that they each feel is between them.
So one of the things I've come to love about the guests that we have on our podcast is hearing them read their poems in their own voices. I particularly think of Liz Berry. I think she could read a takeaway restaurant menu to me and I'd love it.
It used to be the phone book, didn't it? No one knows what a phone book is now. It's like a phone box. What's a phone box?
But yeah, what a voice, and
fantastic,
amazing poems as well.
And so many people said to me after that interview how they'd enjoyed listening to her, and she's got this lovely mellifluous voice. It's just beautiful, isn't it? I mean, if people who say that the Black Country or Midlands accents are ugly, they need to listen to Liz Berry, I think.
Yeah.
And she had so many interesting insights, and I remember one of the things we talked about was truth. What is the truth when you're writing a poem? And she had something to say about that was very interesting. Let me just rummage about in the archives and find it.
Let's hear it now.
All right.
That's something that I always like to talk about with other poets and with students. I say it's all right to make it up. It doesn't have to be true. It can be true to the heart of something, or emotionally true, without you having to say or use exactly what happened to you. And I think especially if you're writing about a region, it's no good just saying what's already been said or what people already know. You've got this chance to do something different, to make people see it in a new way. And I think that was something that was quite particular to Black Country and how it was embraced by readers, was that it showed a region everyone thought they knew about or didn't really know about or weren't that interested in. And it lifted it up and showed it in this dark and unexpected light.
Doing the Land of Hawk. That's the Land of Hawk by Django Reinhardt. Who'd have thought it? It's classy stuff, isn't it? It makes me think about, growing up in old land in tan.
Makes me think about losing fingers like poor old Django Reinhardt did.
Oh no, did he?
Yeah,
I didn't know that.
He had to invent a new technique for playing.
You're joking?
Yeah.
Wow. I'm impressed with that story. So where were we?
So in this season, like the others really, we've had just an interesting variety of guests with all their different perspectives. I particularly liked, talking to Pete Reynard and Robert Hamburger. Both had sort of different takes on masculinity. Both of them were very sensitive and kind of thought through and gentle and aware of the impact that, for want of a better word, the patriarchy has, the way that's warped human relationships, like Robert says in this piece.
As you know, there's lots of concern about young men and mental health, the way masculinity has trapped them, I think, in not being able to own their feelings or even share them. Tragic, really. I remember in the 70s we thought that, gender roles would find a way of liberating all of us, and that seems to simply not have happened, really, particularly for young people, I think. But I'm glad the issue of masculinity and this man representing the struggles that men have it comes across, really. I was hoping it would. I mean, I try and focus on very small details, but hopefully there's some wider resonance going on there.
So one of the questions you asked Richard Skinner, Peter, was to do with, does a certain emotion lead you into a poem or bring a poem out of you? Is that the impetus for a poem, a particular emotion? And he was pretty unequivocal about that, wasn't he? He sort of said no. Yeah,
he likes to discover how he's feeling about things through writing.
Yeah, and staying open and
I kind of feel that way too, actually.
Yeah. And I remember when I talked to Matthew Stewart, we talked about whether a poet is in some way consciously or unconsciously manipulating the emotions of its readers. And he had some things to say about that, about how he feels about what he's doing when he's writing.
He doesn't have emotional designs on his readers.
Let's hear what he said.
Emotion is hugely human quality, and I wouldn't want my poetry to turn its back on it. I'm not sitting down to tug at someone's emotions. I'm trying to generate an emotionally true and believable world that invites my readers in.
I relish the opportunity to interview Sarah Barnsley because I'm a great admirer of her book, The Thoughts. It's sort of a book about a transformation in a person's struggle with OCD, but the poems that result from this engagement are just there's so much variety in terms of form and content.
Yeah, they're just so innovative, and it's extraordinary the way that Sarah manages to tackle the subject in so many ways, and there's a huge amount of humour as well, isn't there?
To be laugh out loud about something so challenging is absolutely brilliant writing.
Well, let's hear a bit of what she had to say.
I like how Sharon Olds talks about her work as being apparently personal, when we're being invited to kind of question this idea of veracity. And I really like what Caroline Bird says. I might be slightly misquoting here from when I've heard her speak. I have written the truth, but no facts. That's what I was after, I suppose. I mean, if you're looking for the exact facts of my OCD as I'd recount them to a therapist, you're not going to find that in this book. But I really hope you'll find the truth of it, if that makes sense.
A nice cup of tea.
It's getting older and older, this recording session.
Well, we haven't had a nice cup of tea, but we've had a nice little beer, haven't we?
First beer of the day, yes.
And we're off to a nice open mic this evening. And so this is our farewell for the summer to our listener.
Do we have an ideal listener in mind? Or...
Oh, I do.
Do you?
Ooh.
Oh.
Yeah, someone who listens and says, wow, this is fantastic. I'll tell all my friends. I'm going to buy them a cup of coffee at buymeacoffee.com for a mere £2.
Well, those people are to be commended, aren't they?
They certainly are. They certainly are. And also, the ideal listener, of course, tells people about Planet Poetry and shares on Twitter. But even if you don't do those things, of course, we still value your listening ears.
We do. We love the fact that people listen to us. And it's a thing of continual surprise and wonder that they do. But we've had so many amazing guests this season. And
there are more to come next season.
And we're going to carry on doing this because it's a blast and it's fun. And I hope you will tune into us next season.
Which will be September or October or something, isn't it?
It'll be later in the year, yeah.
Later in the year, yeah.
In the fall. So what we're going to do, shall we take a selfie that we could post on the internet?
We'll take a selfie, we'll post it on the internet, and it'll be on the website. And we just say farewell, everybody. Have a lovely summer and enjoy a nice cup of tea.
Oh, that's what that title of that strange music is. This is what Robin listens to.